Hello, welcome to AEW.1, the AEW Women's Division blog. My name is Travis. You can read more of our articles at our website at AEW.1 or check me out on Twitter at AEW_ONE. And if you haven't done already, please subscribe to this channel. We really appreciate it. All right, let's get into it. Red Velvet is an outstanding homegrown talent for AEW with tremendous potential. She's lightning quick, she's tenacious, she's as athletic and flexible as seemingly anyone on the roster. And it's not a comparison that many would make, but she checks a lot of the same boxes that Darby Allin does, where she can make opponents like Jade Cargill and Chris Statlander look like they have superhuman strength, and her flexibility allows her to sell bumps that others couldn't. Despite being a natural sympathetic underdog with energy to burn for those babyface fire-up spots, Red Velvet's character has never really been fully fleshed out, I feel, which makes it hard to connect with her as a wrestler. And after seeing Red get booed against Britt Baker, in Pittsburgh, mind you, and Sky Blue, in her hometown of Chicago, mind you, and then Willow Nightingale, and it doesn't really matter where you are, Willow Nightingale is always the babyface, it felt like Tony Khan pulled the escape hatch on her babyface run. Her chemistry with Jade and the baddies was a natural fit at the time. Again, it was hard to answer the question, who is Red Velvet? So when she turned against Jade Cargill, I don't get the sense that any fans felt like she was the babyface in the feud. At best, it was a heel versus heel feud. The good news in all this is that despite a lackluster character build, Red Velvet is very cemented into this roster, and her run as a baddie is at least memorable in the fact that people remember that she was a baddie. So the building blocks of a backstory within AEW exist. AEW also has, but hasn't really leaned on yet, a backstory from Red's time before wrestling. And I think that it may be the perfect vehicle for developing her character and in-ring traits. But before I get into my pitch, I'll just mention that most importantly, I think AEW fans want to see Red Velvet reach that next level and would be very welcoming and excited at any hint that AEW Creative is getting behind her. So here's the pitch. Like I said, Red Velvet kind of has two separate backstories that I'd like to marry together. The first one is her almost freakishly coincidental connection to Jade Cargill. Not only did they come up through the Nightmare Factory and into AEW together, but they came into this planet together. Same birthday, same birth year, just a few hours up the road from each other. The second is her family connection to boxing. Her father, Prudencio Cardona, and her uncle, Ricardo Cardona, were both world boxing champions. Now her father, now passed, apparently suffered with Alzheimer's. I know on a first-hand basis what an awful disease that is, so I would never presume that Red Velvet would want to bring that real-life situation into her character, but apparently it played a factor in her mother shielding her away from boxing. But in the interest of good taste, I will leave that part out of my pitch, but the fact that her mother didn't want her to box will be part of it. I'll put up the table of contents so you can kind of follow along with where I am in the pitch. It starts with a video vignette. We get altered video clips of Red Velvet getting pinned by Jade Cargill in the 3 matches they faced each other. Red Velvet talks about her almost cosmic connection to Jade Cargill. She talks about how they came up together and wrestling together, and how they were both born on the exact same day, June 3rd, 1992. They were both even born geographically close to each other. But despite these similarities, it's always been Red Velvet who's chasing Jade, and Jade always comes out on top. And after losing Jade to a second time, she had changed up her tactics. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's what they say. And she did that as Jade's baddie. She worked alongside Jade. She trained with her. She scouted for possible weaknesses. But in the end, it still wasn't enough to beat her. Red says she knows she's obsessed, But as they say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So she has to put Jade in the rearview mirror for now. She needs to level up and get better, and if she does that, her and Jade's paths will naturally cross again, because she won't rest until she's the best, and to do that, she'll need to beat the best, and that's Jade. So this establishes a character motivation. Red Velvet wants to be the best, and in her books, that means being able to beat Jade Cargill, which is also a tidy little piece of business because you always want to put over other wrestlers, and this puts over Jade Cargill. Not that she needs it. Our next stop on the story is a match against Willow Nightingale. It was Red Velvet's less than ideal crowd response in a match against Willow during the Owen Hart Cup, which ultimately led to her pivoting to a heel turn. So it seems appropriate that another less than ideal outcome versus Willow Nightingale would spark the next stage of her metamorphosis. Commentary puts over how Red Velvet is trying to pivot in her career. They put over how much she's really broken out since her early days in AEW, but that she's so demanding of herself and she won't be satisfied until she's the best. The match is a mighty struggle. There are a couple times during this match where Red finds that she has a distinct advantage at striking and dodging strikes, but she keeps following up those sequences with high-risk moves that cost her and ultimately cost her the match, as Willow wins shortly after one of these instances. After the match, we see Red Velvet sitting in the ring, looking despondent, crushed in fact, as she starts pulling off her gauntlets and tossing them onto the floor. Commentary puts over her frustration. And in a moment, you'll see how, taking off those gauntlets is symbolic of something. And no, it doesn't have anything to do with the expression throwing down the gauntlets. So part 3 now. After a short break from appearing in AEW, Red Velvet starts to appear on Dark Elevation. And she's changed her look only slightly. Most notably, she's changed out her gauntlets for gear that covers her knuckles. Now, a wrestler needs to be comfortable in their own gear, so, ideally I thought this would be like hand wraps or tape, or it could be padded gloves, but it could even just be something decorative, just as long as it covers her knuckles. Whatever Red is comfortable with. Against enhancement talent, we see Red opening matches by faking that she's going to lock up, and then evading them and hitting them with some body jabs and hooks, followed by wrestling moves. She uses this strategy of opening up her opponents with balking-like technique before hitting moves. All of her opponents are much bigger than she is. Taz puts over on commentary that this is a smart approach for Red Velvet, since in a lockup, when you're smaller, it can be an uphill climb to dictate the fight after a lockup. But by moving and striking, she can grapple opponents who are out of their defensive posture or off balance, making it more likely that she can successfully hit her moves, because her opponent's feet aren't as firmly planted. So I'm not advocating for Red Velvet to take on a boxer gimmick like Anthony Ogogo, but rather that she utilizes boxing as a tactic in amalgamation with her wrestling. Red Velvet finishes each of these matches by throwing a few right hooks into her opponent's oblique, and then when they're hunched over, hitting the angle slam on them. This is sort of how Stone Cold Steve Austin would do the gut kick to set up his opponent into position for a Stone Cold Stunner. Instead, this is using right hooks into the side of the body to get the opponent to wince over, and then they'd be in position for an angle slam. Part 4, a match against Nyla Rose on Dynamite. So in the weeks leading up to this match, fans will be wrong-footed by having Nyla Rose being booked as looking like she's in the early stages of being built up as a challenger to the world title. So let's say the last week, she obliterated a credible threat and made her intentions known after the match. So this match scans as Nyla Rose beating Red Velvet as her own storyline beat on that path. Instead, though, Red Velvet utilizes this new technique on Nyla, and it actually catches her off guard. Red Velvet even executes a German suplex on Nyla by getting behind her and hitting her with jabs in the lower back, which caused Nyla to arch back and lend that momentum to Red for the move. Red Velvet, just like her other matches on Dark Elevation, gets some right hooks in on Nyla's oblique, and then angle slams her for the win. Backstage after the match, Red Velvet is about to get congratulated in an interview by Renee Paquette when Nyla barges in and claims that was a fluke and she wants a rematch. And Red Velvet says, anytime, anywhere. So this has introduced this new in-ring trait of Red Velvet to the mass AEW audience, not just the ones who watch YouTube. And then next we move on to some character development. In part 5, it's another video vignette. We get clips of Red Velvet taping up her hands and doing some boxing training. Red talks about how her father and uncle were both world champion boxers, as we get photos of her father from his boxing days, and maybe some photos of her as a child with her parents. Red explains that that's where she gets her competitive fire from, but her mom never wanted her to get into boxing, so it's a discipline she's never fully dug into, but like it or not, boxing is in her blood. Again, however far Red wants to take this backstory is up to her. I respect any wrestler's wishes to keep their personal life separate, but, we talk about sympathy being the lifeblood of a true babyface, and, it's a story that I'll just speak for myself personally, like having someone close to me who died of Alzheimer's, relating this back to wrestling, when I found out that Saki Kashima from Stardom has a degree in treating dementia patients, that was the first thing that really attracted me to her and wanted to root for her. And of course, everything else that she does is amazing. If you were into Stardom, I don't know if you are, but those real life instances, touch people in a way that you might not anticipate, or that you can really quantify. Anyway, moving on from that, we get more clips from Dark Elevation that are spliced in with her doing boxing training and hitting wrestling moves, as Red talks about how she needed to figure out how she could put larger opponents off balance so that they couldn't just leverage their size advantage over her. Clips from her match against Nyla Rose are shown. Red continues saying that she knows that if she can do this against Nyla Rose, she can use the style against anyone. But her biggest challenge will be fighting Nyla Rose again. Since Nyla now knows what she's going to do, this technique doesn't go anywhere if it can be scouted and easily defended. So part 6 and our last plot point in this revamping Red Velvet story is the rematch against Nyla Rose. We get a tail of the tape before the match, showing all of Red Velvet and Nyla Rose's stats to put over what a size disadvantage Red is at, and to give it a big fight feel, and also really drive the story home that Red has found this new technical edge, and it gave her an advantage in their prior match, but this match we're assuming that Nyla will have brought a different strategy. So in agenting the match, there needs to be an adjustment to Nyla's game plan, but Red Velvet needs to be able to adjust to Nyla's adjustments, because that's what a smart fighter would do. Here's how that works. Whereas Nyla was more aggressive in their prior match, she's approaching slower with her hands up. Red comes in for some punches, but Nyla blocks them and then grabs her and hits power moves on her. Red really takes a beating as commentary puts over that Nyla seems to have successfully slowed Red Velvet down. Commentary relays to the audience that Nyla looks like she's coming with a perfect game plan for Red Velvet. And for a moment, we begin to see Red Velvet lapse back to her old ways by trying to resort to using fast-paced, high-octane offense, but Nyla is able to thwart this due to her power advantage. She hits a beast bomb on Red Velvet, but Red kicks out at 2. She doesn't really get a chance to regroup, but Red Velvet survives long enough to find her opening as Nyla whips her into the ropes, and she comes back with a low drop kick into one of Nyla's legs near her ankle. And this spins Nyla out as she grabs her ankle. Red pounces on her and attacks the ankle and puts her in a heel hook, but Nyla is able to get to the ropes and escape to the floor. Red pursues her and is able to use kicks to knock her off balance and then do a backdrop on the floor. Red then applies a heel hook on the floor where there's no rope break, but must release to get back in before the count of 10. And Nyla also gets in before the count of 10. From here on out in the match, Nyla changes her footing to keep her bad ankle further away from Red Velvet. And she's plenty strong on just that one foot to defend Red Velvet's strikes. However, Red Velvet figures out that if she just throws a crossbody splash at Nyla, Nyla will have to catch her, which causes her to shift her weight to her back foot onto that bad ankle. Nyla Rose crumples under the pain to where she's on all fours. Red Velvet stands over top and starts feeding shots into her oblique. And as Nyla scrambles over the ropes to try to help herself up, she leaves herself in position for the angle slam, which Red Velvet hits for the win. As commentary puts over what a gutsy and heady win this was for Red Velvet. And that is exactly where this pitch ends. Hopefully it's developed more of a character for Red Velvet as it sets her up as a more credible challenger no matter how big, even as big as Jade Cargill, and also gives her some sympathetic traits to her character as well. So what do you think? Is there more that could be done with Red Velvet in this pitch? Do you think this strategy would work? Let me know in the comments below, or look me up on Twitter at AW_1. Thanks for watching, and as always, make sure the women in your life know how much you appreciate them.